Hi everyone, we are back with episode 3 of Backyards with Bolt. We have Dr. Conklin and Inspector Yi here with us today. Be sure to tune into our previous episodes so that you get the full conversation. So, the first question is why is it that in our childhoods it seemed to be way safer than it is right now, even though technology and ways of self protection have improved?
Our perceptions change over time, right? When we're really young, how you feel about society is quite different than when you get older. So I think there's an element of just changing perception and memory over time. If we think about the technology we have now, I mean, I did not grow up with a cell phone. I did not grow up with the internet and social network and social media. With that, I've noticed that I would say we actually have more exposure through that process. We actually expose ourselves more to giving away our private information in ways that people don't necessarily fully appreciate. So right now, you can learn something about me just by looking at the background of my Zoom. Depending on that background, it might tell someone where I am and things I like and whatnot, and people will post on their Facebook page they're going away for a holiday, etc., which we never used to do because we didn't actually have social media available in the past. So I would say part of the answer to that question is actually we're more exposed now. But because I do have a mindset of safety, I'm very careful about the information I put out there. And I think younger generations that grow up with this technology maybe don't come from that perspective because it's just ubiquitous and you grew up with it. I guess I would say we now have new spaces in which we can be vulnerable. So that would be my main answer, and I'm quite keen to hear what Inspector Yi has to say from multiple perspectives on this.
I agree with Dr. Conklin in the sense that we are now more searchable based on all of the technology that's available and all of the electronic footprint that we leave behind, the metadata that is out there. In that way, I think we are not as insulated as we used to be as children. And like myself, when I was growing up, I did not have a cell phone. There was no internet. I typed stuff out on paper and then used liquid whiteout. There was no backspace or anything like that. And if I wanted to talk to my friends, it was on the phone. And we wrote letters to each other that we threw into the mailbox. So everything wasn't as instant. So in that perspective, today you can find out more about a person than historically you could. And that may put you in a position of increased vulnerability should you ever be chosen as a target. On the flip side of that, though, 10, 20, 30 years ago, we were not drowning in torrents of information either. Many of us, when we were younger, we would get information controlled and in certain like bites of it. We wouldn't be this fire hydrant sort of flow of information. Today, young people are bombarded with information, accurate or not, from all different levels constantly. And that could distort one's perception of one's reality. The information that's being sort of generated and swirled around right now, very little of it that gets attention is positive news, right? And as a result, if you're constantly bombarded by this negative energy of information, you're going to get that almost hyper-vigilant sense of almost paranoia that the whole world's a bad place and I'm so unsafe, when in reality, if you're looking at crime statistics in violent crimes against a person, not being gender specific or racial specific, it hasn't changed all that much. And in some cases, some crimes actually have gone down from, say, 10, 20 years ago. But because of the information we're getting and how we're getting it, we may get the same piece of information, the same incident, 800 different times from different angles. And our brain perceives that as frequency, not as, oh, that's just the one incident being presented to me 800 times. So then you get that sort of overwhelming sense of, oh my gosh, this is happening all the time everywhere. So that could be another reason why it felt safer in our childhood than it does now. Because in our childhood, we weren't bombarded with this, wave after tidal wave of information.
That's a very, very unique perspective on
Yeah.
on technology and safety. I actually remember like a while ago we were having this conversation at school in class, and my peers brought up similar thoughts. So it's very interesting to
It
see.
is, yeah. Like, we usually don't think about it when we are on our phones and we're just like reading the news. We'll continue with our second question. How do we teach younger generations about sexual violence without making them paranoid?
I would come to answer this question from, I guess, my public health perspective around, say, sexually transmitted diseases and sexual health education, right? You know, it's important for young people at whatever age they're at and using age appropriate information to still give correct information around sexual and reproductive health. And that does include statistics around violence, sexual violence. Different groups are more at risk of sexual violence. Women are much more than men, but within that, trans women are also very, very highly vulnerable to sexual violence. I think information is important, and I think accurate information is important. And the issue of how to give it without creating paranoia, I feel like this question resonates with questions that come up with STI information. Or, you know, if you teach children about sex, does that mean that they, you know, engage in it more or don't or whatnot? Being educated is important regardless. I think there's ways to give that information in an appropriate way, in an age appropriate way. But I remember that several of the women's sort of self-defense classes I've been to and in my martial arts classes, you know, the messages I got are a little bit of paranoia can be a good thing when it comes to your safety, right? And so I would actually rather be slightly paranoid or be perceived as being slightly paranoid if that means that I stay safe. And if it means that, you know, if other people think, oh, she's paranoid, you know, walking down the middle of the street in the middle of the night, so be it. If that means that I've avoided a potential incident, then that's okay. You know, I think there's a healthy level of paranoia you can have around these really, really important topics. I guess I would sort of reframe the question maybe around, you know, giving proper information around sexual health, and that would include statistics on violence.
Absolutely.
Dr. Conklin, I'm going to say that you're not being paranoid. I'm going to say that you're going to be, based on your experience and your knowledge and your education, you are tactically aware.
Okay.
You are. You're tactically aware, and you're taking the precautions to mitigate the risk factors. That's all you're doing. Paranoid is behaving in a way without reasonable information. Being paranoid is irrational. You're not being irrational in your decision making. You're basing it on your knowledge, your training, and, you know, whatever experiences that you've had that has acquired you that knowledge. So you're tactically aware. So I'm going to approach this one in this way. So how do we teach younger generations about sexual violence without making them paranoid? So violence, whether it's sexual or not, does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't just appear. There's a build-up to it. And oftentimes sexual violence, there may be grooming, it may be other things that happen, but there's a build up to it. There's steps before violence happens. One way to approach this without creating paranoia amongst our young people is to teach them at a very young age with age appropriate information and understanding the importance of setting personal boundaries. I think that's the first and foremost thing. What are appropriate personal boundaries? And that they have the right to set those boundaries so that they can feel safe and comfortable. It is their right. So to instill that early on in their development sets the foundation to build up on all those other great sort of mechanisms to keep themselves safe. Understanding what a healthy relationship looks like is important because that's all part of our socialization and how we, you know, interact with people and how we move about and get around in this world. How to facilitate and foster a healthy relationship. And again, that will involve the type of language that we use, the understanding verbal and nonverbal cues. Again, teaching children socialization, appropriate socialization. And also to recognize signs of unhealthy behavior and to empower them with the knowledge in how to deal with that. I think you have to give them both sides of the coin. And again, present it in a way that doesn't make them feel scared, but enables, make them capable. And then also teaching, like we have a cadet program that we run out of here. And what the cadet program is you have all these sort of prepubescent, pubescent males and females together in this program, learning how to be good citizens in their community. But what we find is that a lot of these young kids don't understand what appropriate behavior looks like and what respecting boundaries looks like. And oftentimes our counselor they have to pull certain, young people to their side, and sometimes, the young man, and say, hey, how you're behaving, it's being perceived, it's creepy, stop it. If you want to communicate this, maybe perhaps try it this way. So teaching our young people respectful, appropriate, boundary respecting type of behavior is important. And then again, like on the flip side of that, understanding what bad behavior looks like and then how to deal with it.
Definitely education plays an important part.
Just sort of echoing what both of you have said, that just because we are teaching young people about sexual violence does not mean they need to be afraid of it. But if they don't know what it is, I think human beings fear the unknown. So it's so important to know what they're dealing with, and like you mentioned, know how to deal with it.
I think for too long, we've not really talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
The private has been the private sphere, and that's been a huge part of, in many ways, the original feminist movement around making the private public, because it is a political act, essentially, right? At least from that perspective. But just this idea that for a long time, these topics were not talked about and not given to young people around, the healthy relationship and then the unhealthy relationship. These topics really are relatively fairly new as far as even being discussed publicly by citizens, or potentially even have actual education programs within schools. So I can only think that there's benefit to opening the discussion, and the more we discuss it and the more we share, what is a healthy way of communicating, what is appropriate, what are boundaries, and how to respect people's boundaries is so key. So in many ways, child development's really, really essential. And there are, at certain stages, young babies, might push away from a family member because they don't want to get a hug, perhaps, but not forcing that child to engage in that, because that undermines that natural developmental stage of me as my body as a young being in relation to someone else, even if that's a family member. But learning that boundary is so important. And so in some ways, parenting is an element of that, and parents having knowledge of the importance of that developmental stage and enabling that boundary setting is so key.
Do you know what comes to mind, Dr. Conklin, when you say that? Is when you put that screaming child on top of Santa's knee and they don't want to be on Santa's knee. That just so brought that home to light. That little child is uncomfortable, yet we're forcing it to sit on Santa's knee. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of absolute, kind of perfect example, isn't it, really?
Thank you both for sharing your perspectives. These are not topics that are discussed enough. And so when we're starting these conversations, they can be difficult to discuss. Thank you for talking to us about them today, and hope that the people that are watching these episodes are able to start thinking, because this is really about the stuff that we've been conditioned to believe for years and years, and unlearning and relearning.
That's a wrap for our third episode, and tune in for our future episodes.